Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's edition of the Tanzu Community Edition community meetings. If you're watching this from home, we encourage you to come join us live. We are now meeting every week, every Wednesday at 11 a.m. Pacific time. It's a way for you to come and meet other members of the community, listen in on what the maintainers are working on, provide any feedback, and if you have anything that you need help with regarding using Tanzu Community Edition, you can have live help when you come to these meetings. If that one, if this time doesn't work for you, we also have monthly community meeting, which we hold every second Thursday of the month at 9 a.m. India Standard Time. And if you still aren't able to meet up with us in person, on either of those options, you can still find us in the Tanzu Community Edition channel in the Kubernetes Slack workspace. You can find us in GitHub discussions. You can add your request, question, or suggestion in our issue list. You can also email us, and you can find us on Twitter. So hopefully if you are able, if you need to reach out to us, any of those options you can find us at. We're happy to help. When you attend these meetings and you do have something you want to discuss, just add that down at the discussion topic section of the agenda, and we'll get to it towards the end of the meeting. At any point that you are interacting with us or many members of the community, whether that be in any sort of space, we ask that you please read and abide by our code of conduct, which is tagged here in the agenda, and it's found in our repo as well. For those that are using the Tanzu Community Edition, we would like to know more about how you're using it. So we've created this pinned issue. When you go to it, there's just a few details we request from you. So just fill that out, add a comment here, and that just helps us to learn more about how folks are using it and help us with product development, as well as it helps other members of the community understand better of how to use it in ways that they may not have known before. And if you are attending today's meeting, please put your name and any company that you are representing in the attendee section right here. Moving on to announcements. So if you have been attending our meetings and office hours previously, and you've been watching the video recordings, and you notice that I didn't mention the office hours at the beginning of this video, that's because we've decided to no longer have office hours, and instead we're just moving to community meetings every Wednesday, and these will be 45 minutes long, offering a little bit more time to go into more depth of any discussion topics, anything that you may need help with as well. So it's not that we are going to be meeting less, it's that we actually are going to be meeting more. So hopefully you'll be able to join us moving forward. Now on to something a little bit more exciting. We have released 0.11 last week. And Josh, you want to?
Yeah, sure thing. So for those who don't watch the etcd mailing list very very constantly, there was a data inconsistency issue found in etcd. In this version of etcd 3.50 is in v0.11.0 of TCE. So we wanted to give the community a heads up on this. Being a pre 1.0 project, it might not be wise to run TCE as your production, container orchestrator today anyways. But in case you are doing production oriented use cases, which is totally fine, v0.11.0 may succumb to this inconsistency issue. It is pretty niche. Like you have to have etcd being extremely under load and then it be killed, and basically some transactions might not be consistently committed amongst members. So very, very niche thing, but still something to be aware of. I know we have some people on this call who also use TKG, which is the VMware product of Tanzu. So just note that this is also something in 1.5 to be aware of, because many people do run that in production. In our next release of TC, which we'll talk about later today, this will be addressed. And then in a patch release of TKG coming up, it'll be addressed as well. So just let us know if you have any questions in Slack. We just wanted to, give a quick heads up on this for people that are trying out v0.11. Most use cases you're playing around with should be totally fine. Thanks.
Well, thanks. Really appreciate that. Then next, we have a demo of Cartographer, which is what's been included for the 0.11 release. And Kartik is going to be doing a little demo of that. So I will stop sharing my screen so you can take over.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Kartik. I'm a PM at VMware, doing mostly app toolkit and Cartographer and those kinds of things. I'm also glad to have a lot of the members of the Cartographer team here so they can keep me honest and correct me during the demo and help me out in case I go somewhere where the demo gods don't help me. So we'll see. I'm also gonna do a much more like the beginner version. In fact, the Cartographer team recently put out an amazing first supply chain tutorial. I'm really gonna walk through that with TCE as a way to sort of how we can use Cartographer to create a place where app operators can create a supply chain and how app developers can leverage it. So let's go through it. Let me share my screen. Okay. Before I kind of go into the demo itself, probably also should sort of talk a little bit about Cartographer itself. Cartographer is an open source project. It's a supply chain choreographer for Kubernetes. It enables users to create like a path to production, like a pre-approved version of path to production by bringing various Kubernetes resources for the sort of various elements of the existing tool chain. So you may have like a test, build, scan, and deploy as part of your path to production, and having kind of tools for each of those pieces, and being choreographed by Cartographer is kind of like the main value proposition, in a way that it's set up once by app operators, and then multiple app teams can take benefit out of that. So that's kind of like a brief summary about it, and I'm going to jump to the demo at this point. You can see my blank screen. I'm skipping the steps of which you probably are more familiar with or are on the kind of known for you from a Tanzu Community Edition perspective, which is that I already have an unmanaged cluster created. So if I do this, it should give me, that's the demo I have, that's the cluster that I have running. What I will start with is installing the Cartographer package in from TCE. So if I do, sorry, I'm doing the repository list. That should just work. So I can see that Cartographer is here. If you look at the docs page for Cartographer in TCE, you'll see that it requires Cert Manager. So my first step is going to be installing Cert Manager. Also, as this happens, just once again, I'm just going to put it in chat. If you want to check out Cartographer, I'm just going to put the link there. Also, the demo that I'll be doing is one of the tutorials that are provided there. So you could very much take it for your first spin as well. Right now, I'm going to go ahead and install Cartographer. So I had two packages that I had installed. Cert Manager is the only prerequisite required for it. Oops, doesn't look like that. I kind of copied the double quotes as well. Okay. All right. So now that I have Cartographer installed, I'm going to walk us through a first example of how to use it. So the scenario I want you all to imagine is we have app developers and we have app operators in a company, or that both roles are being played by the same person. Either way, for this demo, we'll kind of switch hats. So for first, I'll wear the app operator hat, and my job is to create a path to production in a way that an app developer can come in and only have to think about their own image or their OCI image that they want to run in a production environment. While Josh said that this is not your production environment, for now, imagine this TCE cluster as your production environment. All right. So what I'll do is I'll construct the templates, the Kubernetes templates by hand for the first time. I do have the pre-built ones if I kind of not able to do it right, but I'm going to attempt creating those templates by hand. So the first one that I'll make sure I share Adam. Okay, so just create a new file and say supply chain template YAML. Oh, by the way, when I meant by hand, I didn't really mean by hand because I'm still copying it from my script. But what you'll see here is this is a cluster template CRD. It has, as part of the template, it's part of the spec itself, it has a template for deployment. And it has some fields that, as the comments say, some are unique, some are hard-coded, and some are known only to the developer. So some of these things we can get, some of these things I might be an app operator and configure it for all developers or all dev teams. For example, the number of replicas that you can run. So I'll go ahead and make this 3. Some of these fields can be got by the objects that will get created. So we can, this is not something that will be specific to developers, but will be something that is unique for every app that is running. Oops. So I'll just go ahead and do this. So as you can see, this spec, what it does is it has a template for deployment, and it also specifies what kind of pods that, or kind of containers that need to be created, and the number of them, as well as sort of the selector. So this really is a template for how a deployment should happen. All right. So now that I have this, I still don't have what the image should be, what the image should be expected. So what we'll do is this will be one of the like parameters that we'll expect that the developers actually enters. So they need to provide, this is probably the only variable that the app developer might need to specify. So, all right, so we have the supply chain template. What we'll need is we'll need to give Cartographer a set of permissions. So I'm going to go ahead and call this RBAC. We need these permissions so that Cartographer is able to create the resources as they're needed, right? So let me go ahead and do that. So I'm going to go create the service account. I will also add the role. Probably don't need to have the quotes there. And then I'll also add the role binding to that service account. So what we have here is a service account. We have a role which allows specifically the API group of apps, and specifically resource being deployments, and allows you to create, update, delete, and watch, get some of the sort of basic actions on those deployments. This is what will allow Cartographer to actually create the deployment on behalf of the developer. So, all right, now that I'll save this, and finally, what I need is the actual supply chain. So the reason you had a template is because then you can use that template for multiple supply chains, if you'd like. Right, I'll keep going. Sorry, I'm not watching the chat, so I won't be able to respond until I'm done with the demo. All right, so finally, the supply chain itself. The supply chain is a cluster supply chain. So I'll start with kind of just specifying the API kind and metadata part of it, and then get into the spec. So in the spec, I'm gonna have the resources. So this is the actual supply chain. This is, in my mind, like the actual set of events that will happen in the parcel production setup. The only job here, of course, is the the only job I have here is the deploy job. So all this supply chain is going to do is take an image as an input and create and deploy that image for me as a deployment. Okay, so I think I have the supply chain constructed. So now I have all of the files created, and hopefully they all are set up right. Now I'm going to switch hats and also create the app developer, whatever the app developer needs to write in terms of their YAML. And hopefully that YAML isn't a lot, honestly, because that's the whole purpose. Is Cartographer sets up these supply chains, and app operators can set up these supply chains, and then the developer has to do pretty minimal things in terms of using them. So all I've done is created like a API version for tying with Workload with metadata about hello, and also just the label of pre-built images. This is actually pretty key because this is actually what the supply chain will look for to know that I need to use, I need to actually deploy this image based on this workload type. This is the label it's going to look for. All right, now that I have all of the YAML files constructed, I'm going to go ahead and come back to actually running things. So I am going to go ahead and apply these YAML files and see how it goes. I just realized I'm not sure if kubectl is good at just doing the files in the folder, or will do the folder as well. So let me just go ahead and apply the files one by one. Template. We'll start with the template. Cool. Okay, so far. I'm gonna apply the RBAC. Then I'm gonna go apply the supply chain. Oh, I missed an L. Okay. There we go. Suppy chain is created. All right, and finally, I'm gonna go ahead and apply the workload YAML. So if I go ahead and look at my deployments, I should have the deployment. It's still, I think, it's still sort of being created. So let's look at the YAML and see what is going on. Oh, sorry. So the status conditions are good things to look at. Oh, I should say in the observation section, we may not see all of the detail because I'm using Cartographer 0.2.2 in TCE, but I think some of the new features from Cartographer come in v0.3, and that's going to make it to TCE soon as well. But just want to give you a heads up. But if you look at sort of the status.conditions, you'll see that you'll be able to see that you can see there are specific, the supply chain itself is ready. So what it looks like to me, the resources submissions are complete. So it should indicate hopefully that things are in place. Let me try again. Oh, looks like there it is. So the deployment is up and running. I'm going to pause here just because I think this is where I want to kind of give an introduction of how to create the supply chains and how to leverage them for app developers to be able to just provide the input for the image. But if other cartographer folks want to chime in here and add more about cartographer, please feel free to do so.
Yeah, it's worth mentioning that those features that Kartik were talking about that's coming down in the newer version, in that status, you'll actually see detail about the deployment object that gets created there. So you can follow the chain of events more easily.
Great, thanks, Sam, for that. And thank you, Kartik, for showing us that. Do we have any questions for Kartik or the cartographer team?
Have folks all kind of played with it already? Most folks here are familiar with Cartographer. Hopefully that that tutorial, I can link the tutorial in the chat, and that'll be a good kind of introduction for anyone who may not have played with it. Definitely makes it easy for you to get your first template up and running.
Oh, that'd be great. Thank you. Okay, moving on to status updates. Kartik, looks like you have a few to share with us.
Oh, looks like I'm back up. All right, so we also shipped App Toolkit as an experimental package last week. So if folks have tried it or have an update, please share if you have any feedback. Yeah, nothing. That's all on that. If there are any feedback points, please let me know. Cool. And then I'll move on to my updates. Really, just some of the features that are coming. Cool. Thank you, John. Some of the features that are coming in as part of the just to kind of call out, Tanzu application platform is a commercial product from VMware, but some of the open source technologies we are bringing into Tanzu Community Edition, which make it the story of getting started with development locally way easier. One of the things that are coming in is the Tanzu Apps CLI plugin. It's already open source, but we'll kind of make it part of your installing the Tanzu CLI process. Those are all the links for the issues if you'd want to take a look. One of the other things that is coming is the basic supply chain. So the way I kind of showed the demo today of like a basic app deploy, a more sort of end-to-end story of, hey, I'm a developer and I have some source code in my Git repo, but I want to have it running as a Knative service with the steps between going from source to image to a actual running Knative service. That's the supply chain package that's coming into TCE and App Toolkit. Yeah, I think I also saw Ciro there, so he's the one kind of spearheading that effort. We're also working on trying to simplify the setting up the Kpack dependencies. So as you may be aware already that you can install Kpack today, but you still have to kind of go through a set of steps to set up the cluster store, stack, builder, all of the things you really need to be able to build images. So that's something that we are working on. And then finally, I think you saw today in the demo, I have to set up service accounts, role bindings and roles for me to tell Cartographer to create resources in my namespace. We're working on kind of making that easier for the first time user, so that the user does not have to understand all of the sort of the service account and credentials for the first time, do it in their default namespace. And then going forward, there'll still be docs on how to set that up in other namespaces. But yeah, that's all I had. And I see Steve, you have a question?
Yeah, any thoughts about moving like a lightweight registry or even stripping down Harbor as a registry into App Toolkit? Because I mean, that's part of my local flow if I'm using TCE locally is I know I'm going to have to push to a registry and then pull from a registry, right? Because that's the flow. And so I would love to have some sort of local to use. It could just be a super, almost like a flat file system with an API server that behaves just something, or it could be Harbor, but not all of Harbor. Has there been any thought been put into that or any ideas around that?
Yeah, that's something I've been kind of exploring, trying to figure out what kind of image registries could help with that. I think Nick had shared an image registry that is a very sort of temporary one, but that may not be good enough for like KPAC to use because you would want to be able to store images. So definitely exploring that. Surprisingly, it's oh, looks like Scott. Yeah. Okay, good to know, Scott. Yeah, definitely on my mind to explore and make that part easier, because I agree. For local development and for a lot of app developers who are not wanting to learn new concepts, image registry is one of those that they have to today, and they have to be aware of it. So yeah, it's on the radar. I don't have more concrete answer of what that looks like, but it's definitely on top of mind.
Thank you for that. Any other questions for Kartik? Okay, moving on to engineering updates. Josh?
Yeah, so we are working on V012. Actually, I meant to put the date in here. We're targeting somewhere in the realm of May 10th. That's our current target date. Just to know what's going on in core TC, we're hoping to bump our framework version, Tanzu framework, which will go from V011, what are we on right now? 2, I think, to probably V011.4. There's some risk there with dates and stuff, but the reason we want to get it in is because there's some backported patches that will improve UX. Like there's been some weird log messages and things that we've cleaned up and a couple other nice to haves. And then also there's going to be a new feature in that framework version that lets you see what edition your cluster is working in. So for those of you who do work with like TKG and TCE clusters, you'll be able to see whether the workload cluster is a TCE based or a TKG based cluster, which can be helpful in some automation stuff. Then a lot of our work for this release cycle to May 10th will be in unmanaged clusters. One that I'm going to call out real quick and then just have John talk about some of the features he's excited about is that we are trying to switch back to Antrea as our default CNI for unmanaged clusters. One of the reasons we switched to Calico in the first place was to support the restarting of unmanaged clusters. And now Antrea actually has some fixes in place that make that possible, which is super, super awesome. We do now support ARM machines, so M1 Max and things. And unfortunately, the Antrea binary is having some issues with like the standard Docker desktop VM. So long story short, we're exploring getting back to Antrea as our default CNI. It might happen in 0.12, or we might push it out a little bit. But that's kind of the boring stuff. John, do you want to tell us about some of the features you're excited about in 0.12 for unmanaged?
Yeah, there's a lot of really exciting stuff coming that's already been implemented or is pretty much on the way. A big one is a dynamic resolution with the Tanzu Kubernetes releases via a compatibility file. So now when you run unmanaged cluster create, you will actually, it will query a compatibility file up on the Harbor registry and then pull that down and then inspect what versions of TKRs are compatible with that version of the unmanaged cluster binary. That'll enable us to not have to recompile a binary if there's like a breaking issue or something in a TKR. We can just release a new compatibility file and it'll automatically grab that and get us a new version of the TKR. The profiles, quote unquote profiles, name pending, since that's a bit overloaded with profiles in TAP, but now unmanaged clusters will support profiles, basically where it will pre-install a package and you can drop a YAML's a values YAML file to that pre-installed package. I did a lot of experimenting with App Toolkit actually with this. So you can say tac profile, app toolkit, and then it will automatically grab that at the latest version and then install that with your values YAML. And then boom, there's all the other pre-installed packages. And it's a really, really cool workflow for getting a bunch of stuff onto your cluster at create time, which is really exciting. Some of the stuff that's being worked on that also is really big is the Minikube provider is coming. So that will be in 0.12. That means that you could define TAC provider and with Minikube, and it will install with a Minikube VM. And all the install options and stuff are going to be there with that as well. So that's a really big, exciting thing as well. I'm trying to think what else. Start, stop, lifecycle hooks are coming. Josh has been working on that. That'll be really close behind the Minikube provider. And then, yeah, that's all I can think of right now. Some other like sugary things with the cake there. I'm working on the raw kind config merging with some of the flag configs as well. That'll just give users the ability to have kind of a template that they have with a config file and then be able to modify that with the CLI flags as well. So a bunch of really nice UX stuff, UI stuff, and the provider and the profiles. So feel free to hit me up on Slack if you have questions about that stuff.
Excellent. Thanks, Josh and John. Any questions for either of them regarding this?
Hey, John, Kartik asked one that I think the group might just be interested in. So the Minikube provider is a little bit different than like the kind provider, right? Because kind, yes, we import at like a Go level, right? Maybe you could just talk a little bit about how that's going to work.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess that's a bit of an implementation detail, but the Minikube libraries are not really exposed, so we can't really go out and grab them from a programming perspective. Instead, we expect the binary to be on the system. And in our pre-flight checks, we'll actually see if that binary is on the system, if it's runnable, if it's like ready to go, and then we'll log out some useful messages to the user if it's not. But it won't try to actually go in and install that binary or try to get it for your system. That's a bit out of scope for Unmanaged Cluster itself. But outside of that, it will then call out to the binary to actually do all that stuff. Yeah, so expect the binary to be there.
Cool, thanks.
It looks like Scott asked if Minikube is still limited to one cluster per machine. No, actually, you can install multiple Minikube clusters. Minikube does have what they refer to as profiles, again, a bit overloaded, but a Minikube profile is essentially a Minikube cluster that it knows about. So you could have a bunch of these Minikube profiles, which are in themselves clusters. Their core abstraction is Minikube start, which starts creates the default Minikube cluster named Minikube as the profile, right? These levels of abstraction are just gross, but yes, you can have multiple clusters with Minikube.
Yeah, I was testing out John's PR, and one of the things that I loved seeing is with Minikube as my provider, I had a cluster stood up running containerd off of QEMU, and then I had a cluster right next to it running off of Docker, using the Docker driver, and then I had a kind cluster as well sitting next to that. Because so just seamlessly, you have these kind of backends we can plug into and get the same UC or unmanaged cluster functionality against. So, Minikube, aside from just having another provider, is just going to add an even more feature-rich capability set to how your cluster actually exists. So it's really exciting stuff. Can't wait for y'all to try it.
All right, great. Kartik just asked, would the Tanzu Community Edition UC work with an existing Minikube cluster?
Yes. So that is actually an existing feature that is in 0.11 right now, where you can, I forget the flag, I think it's TAC-E for existing cluster. You can actually point that to an existing kube config to kind of attach to that existing cluster. So if you had a Minikube cluster or something else on your system running, you could attach to that and it'll install the Tanzu quote unquote bits, mostly cap controller and all that, but it won't try to create the cluster. So yes, you can do that with an existing Minikube cluster.
That's the parameter, which is not I'm not supposed to call it a feature, but it's there.
It is there, yeah.
Yeah, the line we draw in the sand right now is that unmanaged clusters is not the way you Tanzuify any arbitrary cluster. But there happens to be a flag that if you put the kube config in, we will install the relevant components and repositories. So I know it's a bit pedantic, but until we get our vision fully aligned and can communicate it with you all well in the community, we're going to kind of word it that way. So.
Well, cool. Any other questions, comments? Okay, moving on to advocacy updates. Lee?
I think Lee may have had to drop, but we're a little
Lee had a
light.
drop.
Yep, it's a little light this week, but added the link to a demo Lee did with TCE, Flux, and Pinniped and Dex at a local meetup, and then Steve noted that he's working on some Tanzu data operator demos, so he's starting to work more of the data things. And we have probably 3 or 4 things around Cartographer coming out over the next couple of weeks, so we'll start to see those populated in here. They just didn't make it out in time for this update.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if my blog post went live. I did that blog post on man.
I did not see it, so I didn't add it.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a PR where we found some broken links. We're trying to track down what happened. I know Jennifer reached out to Kay to figure them out, and then we'll get it posted hopefully today.
Okay. That blog post is about managed versus unmanaged, just for if people are curious, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. But the video did go live, but that was a while ago.
Yeah, and this is the blog post, I guess, in tandem with that.
Yes.
Yeah. Cool, thank you. All right, moving on to discussion topics. We have about 5 minutes left. Shimon, are you on the call?
Yes, I am. Thanks. Yeah, so we have a proposal out for what we're calling a concierge, and I just put a link to it in the chat. It's also what Nancy is showing here. Just wanted to draw attention to it. I don't need to walk through every point of it, in this meeting. People can do that offline. But wanted to draw attention to what our purpose here is with a concierge. We've heard from the community that there are pain points around getting the Tanzu CLI installed and running and configured correctly and troubleshooting it. And this idea is to have a native application that the user can just download, run it, and it installs the Tanzu CLI, gets the versioning right, reports any problems, like if you have an existing TKG version and you're trying to install TCE on top of it, that's a problem. And actually then hands off to the UI of the Tanzu CLI, the Kickstart UI for creating a management cluster. And in the future, it can hand off to any other UI that's available. So appreciate feedback on this. Already have gotten some comments on it, but wanted to draw attention to it. We're very excited about the possibilities.
Great, thank you. Any questions for Shimon on this?
I see Scott in the chat. The name concierge is just at this point and more informal name that we're calling it, sort of the working project name internally, just to talk about it. But you're right, there could certainly be a confusion with the Pinniped concierge. In fact, we already had a question previously about that. So we may want to rename it. I'm open to suggestions for what would be a happy name for this.
Any other questions or comments? We have 3 minutes left. There's just something that I wanted to bring up on my end. There was something that had popped up, I think back in January before I came on as a community manager. It started with, where should we point people to ask questions after a webinar? And that just kind of led to having sort of a central place for people to go to for frequently asked questions, so that folks can do it more searchable than going to Slack. And at the time, I believe I had looked at the Slack thread, and it had been decided to go to Google Groups, but looking more into that, I thought it could get a little annoying for those almost 300 folks that are in Google groups to be bombarded with questions popping into through email, and then conversations going back and forth through there, and just kind of flooding folks' inboxes. So, there's Slack, but Slack is kind of annoying with searching. So I was thinking of the idea of actually starting a GitHub wiki with FAQs, and if the maintainers comment or like react with a certain emoji, it'll notify me to say, hey, this is a good one to add to the wiki, and I would add that to the wiki so that people aren't asking the same questions over and over again. And any common questions or things that might be really useful for people to know can live there. And I'd like to hear thoughts on this, or if there's any other suggestions, or if it sounds good. If you need to think on it, we can revisit for next week. That says vote for GitHub discussions and GitHub wikis. I think the idea is to just have one, so that it's not like people can go to GitHub discussions certainly to ask questions, but I think it's more so like creating like one central point to put any questions that come up, try to have something there. GitHub all the things, Kartik, yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I think that GitHub discussions are a good place for the questions, and then the common ones from there to move to GitHub Wiki, and then everything just kind of manage itself in GitHub. Makes sense.
Yeah, I like that. That's a good point. Okay. Steven, raised your hand.
This kind of came up just a little bit, and it's somewhat related, is we are running nightly builds, and we're also doing status updates, and we don't actually, because of the way Kubernetes Slack is administered for good reasons, we cannot post those somewhere on Slack. I'm used to IRC days when, the nightly builds would get posted to IRC, or they get put somewhere. So if people wanted to look at what was happening in the nightly builds, and if they wanted to get status updates on like when the product's launching and all this other stuff, they could get that. There's no way to automate that in the current Kubernetes Slack. I'd be interested to hear if there's other people in the community who are like in the Kubernetes community who have found projects that do a good job of doing that and how they do it. Because I've been trying to think about what would be a good way for us to do that. And, I'm still, let's do it in IRC, because IRC is what I lived and died by for a while, but it seems the world has moved on. So I think it would be good, and it would help with the community if we posted that. And that's all. So if someone has a good idea about how to do that, that'd be great.
I think these are some things we can noodle on. And if anyone has any feedback for either what I've proposed or what Steven's looking for, please let us know. Versus, you can come find us on Slack or email, or you can join next week's meeting and provide your feedback and any ideas you may have. We would love to hear it as well. And also post Steven's issue to the discussion topic section, so you can go to find more information about what he just talked about too. Okay, so we are at time. I will stop sharing my screen. All right, thanks everyone for joining today. If you're watching this from home, again, please come join us live. We meet every Wednesday at 11 a.m. Pacific time. And if you if you have a different time zone that might be suitable for you, we meet monthly, second Thursday of the month at 9 a.m. India Standard Time. And we hope you are able to join us live. We'd love to meet you and hear about how you're using Tanzu Community Edition. With that, thanks and have a good day.